Marcus Chen had always believed that space would be the death of him, but he never imagined it would be quite like this. The emergency klaxon had fallen silent 3 days ago, leaving only the gentle hum of failing life support systems and the occasional groan of twisted metal settling in the void. The Meridian Station, once a gleaming testament to interstellar cooperation, now drifted like a broken corpse through the darkness between stars. The attack had come without warning. The Krathan Empire's warships had emerged from hyperspace like metallic sharks, their weapons already charging as they dropped their cloaking fields. Marcus had been elbow-deep in a malfunctioning atmospheric processor when the first salvo struck. The station's shields had held for exactly 47 seconds before the generators overloaded and died in brilliant cascades of sparks. Now, 3 days later, Marcus found himself the sole survivor among the station's crew of 800. He had searched through the twisted corridors, calling out names until his voice grew hoarse, but found only bodies and the acrid smell of burned circuitry. The evacuation pods had either been destroyed in the attack or launched with their occupants into the cold embrace of space. The mechanic's workshop had become his sanctuary, a small pocket of warmth and light in the dying station. His tools were scattered across the workbench where the explosion had thrown them, but Marcus had carefully gathered each one. A good mechanic never abandoned his tools, his grandfather had always said. Even when facing death in the depths of space, some habits died hard. Marcus pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he studied the jury-rigged life support monitor he had cobbled together from spare parts. The readings were not encouraging. Oxygen levels were holding steady for now, but the carbon dioxide scrubbers were failing faster than he could repair them. He estimated another week before the air became unbreathable. The backup power cells might last 2 weeks if he was careful with the lighting. Water was the real problem. The main reservoir had been breached during the attack, venting its contents into space through a hole the size of a shuttlecraft. Marcus had managed to salvage maybe 3 days' worth from the emergency tanks, and that was assuming he rationed it carefully. He took a small sip from his recycled water bottle and returned to work on the communication array. The primary transmitter was completely destroyed, but Marcus thought he might be able to boost the signal from the emergency beacon. The range would be pathetic, maybe a few light hours at best, but it was better than nothing. As he worked, Marcus found his mind wandering to Earth. His sister would be finishing her shift at the hospital about now, probably grabbing coffee from that little vendor on 5th Street that she loved so much. His parents would be tending their garden, arguing good-naturedly about whether the tomatoes needed more water. Simple, everyday moments that seemed impossibly precious now that he might never see them again. The communication panel sparked as Marcus carefully soldered a new connection. He had learned electronics from his father, who had worked on spacecraft systems before retiring to grow vegetables. Patience and precision, the old man had always said. Rush the job and you'll just have to do it twice. Good advice for life in general, Marcus reflected, though he wondered if patience would be enough to keep him alive long enough for rescue. A distant clang echoed through the station's superstructure, causing Marcus to pause in his work. Probably just more metal settling as the temperature fluctuations stressed the hull. The Meridian had been built to last centuries, but even the best engineering could not withstand a sustained bombardment from military-grade plasma cannons. Another clang, closer this time. Marcus frowned and set down his soldering iron. The sound had a rhythm to it, almost like footsteps. But that was impossible. He had searched every accessible section of the station. There was no one else alive. A third clang, definitely closer. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate as he grabbed the emergency flashlight from his workbench. The workshop's lighting was limited to conserve power, leaving most of the station in darkness. If something was moving out there, he needed to know what it was. The corridor outside his workshop stretched into blackness in both directions. Marcus had barricaded the left passage after a hull breach had made it impassable, so whatever was making the noise had to be coming from the right. He started walking slowly, sweeping his flashlight beam back and forth across the twisted metal and scattered debris. The sound came again, definitely footsteps now, but they were wrong somehow, too heavy and with an odd scraping quality. Marcus had worked with dozens of alien species during his years on Meridian Station, but these footsteps did not match any bipedal species he knew. He rounded a corner and froze. His flashlight beam illuminated a massive hole torn in the station's outer hull, easily 20 meters across. The emergency force fields had long since failed, leaving only the twisted remains of support beams and conduits. But what made Marcus's breath catch in his throat was not the damage itself, but what was moving through it. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a small spacecraft. Its body was covered in scales that gleamed like polished obsidian in his flashlight beam, and its head was distinctly reptilian with intelligent golden eyes that reflected the light. Massive wings folded against its back as it carefully maneuvered through the breach, using claws the size of Marcus's entire body to grip the twisted metal. A dragon. An actual, honest-to-God space dragon. Marcus had heard stories, of course. Spacers loved to tell tales of the Drakmor, the ancient race that supposedly roamed the galaxy long before humans had learned to make fire. Most people dismissed them as folklore, stories made up to frighten rookies on their first deep space runs. But the creature moving through the hull breach was very real and very large and very much capable of swallowing Marcus whole without much effort. The dragon's head turned toward him, those golden eyes fixing on his position with predatory focus. Marcus felt his legs turn to jelly as the creature's lips pulled back to reveal teeth like crystalline daggers. This was it then. After surviving the attack and 3 days of slow starvation, he was going to end up as a snack for a mythical beast. But the dragon did not attack. Instead, it tilted its massive head to one side and made a sound that Marcus could only describe as curious. A deep, thrumming noise that seemed to vibrate through the station's superstructure. The creature's nostrils flared as it scented the air, and then it did something completely unexpected. It spoke. The words came out as a series of harmonic tones that Marcus's universal translator struggled to process. The device in his ear crackled and hissed before finally settling on an approximation. Small, warm one lives, unexpected. Interesting. Marcus tried to speak but found his voice had abandoned him entirely. The dragon waited patiently, those golden eyes never leaving his face. Finally, Marcus managed to croak out a response. Yes, I'm alive. For now. The dragon's head tilted the other direction, and Marcus could swear he saw something like amusement in its expression. For now, yes. Fragile ones always think in such small moments. You are the mechanic one? How do you... Marcus started, then stopped. Yes, I'm a mechanic. Marcus Chen. And you are? Names are difficult in your tongue. I am Keeper of the Flame that Remembers. But your people would likely call me Ember. The dragon's massive form settled more comfortably in the breach, careful not to damage what remained of the structural supports. I have been watching this place since the attack ships departed. Waiting. Waiting for what? For the warm ones to send their rescue ships. But none have come. Ember's voice carried a note of something that might have been sadness. You have been alone here for many cycles. Marcus nodded slowly, still trying to process the fact that he was having a conversation with a creature he had thought was mythical. 3 days. My ship was destroyed with the station's docking bay. I've been trying to repair the communications array, but the damage is too severe, Ember finished. Yes. I observed your efforts. You show admirable persistence for such a short-lived species. Short-lived? Marcus felt a spark of indignation overcome his fear. How old are you? By your reckoning, approximately 4,000 of your years. I was already ancient when your species took its first steps among the stars. Ember's massive head lowered until it was only a few meters from Marcus, who fought the urge to run. Yet in all that time, I have rarely encountered a warm one who continued working when faced with certain death. Most would have given up by now. Marcus shrugged, the gesture feeling absurd in the face of such a massive creature. My grandfather always said that if you're going to die, you might as well die useful. Besides, there's always a chance that someone might pick up the signal. Ah. Ember's eyes seemed to glow brighter. Hope. A curious trait in your species. Even when logic suggests otherwise, you persist in believing that circumstances might improve. It's kept us alive this long, Marcus said, some of his natural confidence returning. We're pretty good at finding solutions to impossible problems. Indeed. Ember pulled back slightly, and Marcus was surprised to realize that the dragon's presence was somehow comforting rather than threatening. Tell me, Marcus Chen, who fixes the broken things, what would you require to make this station whole again? The question caught Marcus off guard. Make it whole. It would take a fleet of repair ships and a full engineering crew. The hull integrity is compromised. Life support is failing. Structural damage is extensive. He trailed off, realizing the futility of the list. But if you had unlimited resources, if the impossible became possible, Marcus found himself actually considering the question seriously. Well, first I'd need to patch the hull breaches, then restore main power so I could get the atmospheric processors back online. After that, it would be a matter of replacing damaged systems and recalibrating everything. He paused. Why do you ask? Ember made that deep thrumming sound again. Because, Marcus Chen, I believe we might be able to help each other. Your species has something mine has long sought to understand, and my people possess capabilities that yours would find useful. What kind of capabilities? Instead of answering directly, Ember shifted position and extended one massive claw toward the twisted hull breach. Marcus watched in amazement as the dragon's scales began to glow with a soft blue light. The light spread from the creature's claw to the damaged metal, and wherever it touched, the twisted beams and conduits began to straighten and heal. In less than a minute, the 20-meter hole in the station's hull had been completely sealed, not just patched or temporarily fixed, but restored to its original condition as if the damage had never occurred. The emergency force fields flickered back to life, and Marcus felt the subtle change in air pressure as the sealed section was restored to the station's atmospheric grid. Impossible, Marcus breathed. For your current understanding of physics, yes. Ember's scales faded back to their normal obsidian shade. But what you call impossible, we call the song of making, the ability to encourage matter to remember its intended form. Marcus stared at the perfectly restored hull plating, his engineer's mind racing with the implications. You could fix the entire station. Perhaps. But such work requires great effort and cannot be sustained indefinitely. More importantly, it would not address the underlying problem. What underlying problem? Ember's golden eyes met his with surprising gentleness. You would still be alone, Marcus Chen. And loneliness is a wound that cannot be healed with the song of making. The simple truth of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. Even if the station were completely restored, he would still be trapped, still isolated, still facing a slow death in the empty void between stars. The dragon was right. Technology could fix many things, but it could not fill the aching emptiness that had been growing in his chest since the attack. So what do you propose? Marcus asked. A partnership, Ember replied. You teach me about your people's ways, their hopes and dreams, and the clever solutions they create for impossible problems. In return, I share the song of making and keep you company until rescue arrives. And if rescue never comes? Then we faced the silence together, as friends. Ember's voice carried absolute sincerity. It is a better fate than either of us would meet alone. Marcus considered the offer. 3 days ago, if someone had told him he would be negotiating with a space dragon for his life, he would have recommended immediate psychological evaluation. Now, faced with the reality of his situation, it seemed like the most reasonable conversation he had ever had. "All right," he said finally. "Partners." Ember's massive head dipped in what Marcus interpreted as a nod of approval. "Partners," the dragon agreed. "Now, show me these broken things you have been working to repair. I am curious to see how warm ones think about the solving of problems." As they made their way back toward the workshop, Marcus felt something he had not experienced since the attack: genuine hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of a dying man, but the real thing. The kind of hope that came from possibility and partnership, and the knowledge that even in the vast emptiness of space, one was not truly alone. Behind them, the restored hull plating gleamed in the dim emergency lighting, proof that impossible things could indeed become possible when different kinds of intelligence worked together. Marcus Chen, mechanic and problem solver, had found himself the most unlikely partner imaginable, and for the first time in 3 days, he began to believe he might actually live to see his sister's smile again. Working with a 4,000-year-old dragon, Marcus discovered, required a complete rethinking of what he thought he knew about engineering. Ember could repair complex damage in minutes, using the Song of Making, but the dragon struggled with concepts that Marcus considered basic, like redundant safety systems and modular design principles. "Your people build things to break in specific ways," Ember observed, as Marcus explained the function of circuit breakers for the 3rd time that day. They had been working together for almost a week now, and the dragon's curiosity about human engineering seemed boundless. "This seems wasteful." Marcus was crouched inside an access panel, rewiring connections to bypass damaged circuits. "It's not wasteful, it's smart. When something goes wrong, we want it to fail safely instead of catastrophically. A blown fuse is better than an exploded power grid. But why not simply make things that do not break at all?" "Because we can't." Marcus emerged from the panel, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. "We don't have your Song of Making. We have to work with materials that wear out, components that degrade, and systems that eventually fail. So we design for graceful failure instead of hoping nothing will ever go wrong." Ember's massive head tilted in the gesture Marcus had learned meant deep thought. The dragon was currently coiled in the main engineering bay, his bulk carefully arranged to avoid damaging the delicate control systems. It had taken some creative problem-solving to find spaces large enough for Ember to fit comfortably. "This explains much about your species," Ember said finally. "You expect failure, so you plan for it. You assume things will break, so you make them easy to fix. It is a philosophy born of limitation, yet it creates remarkable resilience." "Exactly." Marcus felt a surge of pride at the dragon's understanding. "My grandfather used to say that the mark of a good engineer isn't preventing all problems. It's making sure the problems that do happen can be solved with a screwdriver and some common sense." Over the past week, Marcus had learned that Ember was not just one dragon, but part of a vast collective consciousness that the Drakmor called the Eternal Flight. Each individual dragon retained their personality and memories, but they could share experiences and knowledge across vast distances through something they called the Deep Song. "The Eternal Flight is curious about you," Ember had explained on their 2nd day working together. "A warm one who continues to build and repair even when faced with certain death. They wish to understand how such persistence is possible in a species that lives such brief lives." "What have you told them?" Marcus had asked. "That you are teaching me the answer to that very question." Now, As Marcus calibrated the atmospheric processors they had restored using a combination of his technical knowledge and Ember's reality-shaping abilities, he found himself actually looking forward to their daily conversations. The dragon was an excellent listener and asked insightful questions that often made Marcus think about familiar concepts in new ways. "Tell me about your family," Ember said as Marcus fine-tuned the oxygen mixture. "You mentioned a sister and parents during your first day of repairs." Marcus smiled as he adjusted the settings. "My sister Lynn is a doctor on Earth, pediatric surgery. She saves kids' lives for a living. Always said I was wasting my talent fixing machines instead of helping people." "Yet without machines, your sister could not save those children. Medical equipment, transportation systems, life support for premature births, all require the touch of those who understand the making and repairing of complex things." "I never thought about it that way." Marcus paused in his work, struck by the perspective. "She always seemed like the one doing the important work while I was just keeping the lights on." "The lights matter," Ember said simply. "In the darkness between stars, sometimes the lights are the difference between hope and despair. I have seen this in many species during my long existence." Marcus found himself sharing more about his life than he had intended. He told Ember about his childhood on Earth, working in his father's garage and learning to find satisfaction in taking broken things and making them whole again. He talked about the night he had first looked up at the stars and decided that space needed mechanics too, that someone had to keep the impossible dream of interstellar civilization running smoothly. In return, Ember shared stories of the Drakmor and their travels across the galaxy. The dragon spoke of entire civilizations they had watched rise and fall, of species that had achieved transcendence through technology or enlightenment, and of others that had destroyed themselves through war or environmental collapse. "Humans are young," Ember said one evening as they took a break from repairing the station's navigation array. "But you show patterns I have not seen before. Most species that develop technology quickly either become consumed by it or reject it entirely. Your people seem to have found a balance." "Balance?" Marcus laughed, thinking of Earth's pollution problems and the ongoing debates about artificial intelligence ethics. "We're barely keeping it together most of the time. Half the species thinks we're going too fast, and the other half thinks we're not going fast enough." "Yes," Ember agreed, which surprised Marcus. That tension, that constant questioning and adjustment. Most species reach a point where they become certain they have found the correct path. They stop adapting. Your people never stop arguing about whether they are doing things right, so they never stop trying to do things better. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm from the communications panel. Marcus rushed to check the readings, his heart racing with hope. But instead of an incoming message, he found evidence of a massive energy discharge somewhere in the system. "What is it?" Ember asked, sensing Marcus's sudden tension. "Something big just dropped out of hyperspace, multiple signatures." Marcus's fingers flew over the controls, trying to boost the sensor array's limited range. "I can't get a clear reading, but—" The main display screen flickered to life, showing a fuzzy image of several large spacecraft. Marcus felt his blood turn cold as he recognized the distinctive angular design of Krathan Empire warships. The same ships that had destroyed Meridian Station were back. "They must be checking for survivors," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "Or maybe they're here to salvage whatever's left." Ember's scales began to glow with the soft blue light of the Song of Making, but instead of the peaceful radiance Marcus had grown accustomed to, this light seemed agitated, almost angry. "The attack ships have returned. This is most unexpected." "We need to hide," Marcus said, already shutting down non-essential systems to reduce the station's energy signature. "If they detect us, they'll finish what they started." But Ember was not listening. The dragon's massive form was perfectly still, scales pulsing with that strange blue light. His golden eyes had gone completely blank, as if he was looking at something very far away. "Ember?" Marcus called softly. "Are you all right?" The dragon's eyes suddenly snapped back into focus, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics Marcus had never heard before. Multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. "The Eternal Flight has decided," Ember announced. "The attack ships will not be permitted to complete their mission." "What mission? What are you talking about?" "The warm ones aboard those vessels are not here for salvage," Ember said, his voice still carrying those strange harmonics. "They come to gather data about human defensive capabilities. This station was not destroyed in conquest, but as part of a larger study. They plan to use what they learn here to attack your homeworld." Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "Earth? They're planning to attack Earth? The Eternal Flight has seen this pattern before. A species identifies a potential threat and conducts what you might call a stress test. They attack an isolated target to observe response times, tactical capabilities, and resource allocation. The data gathered here would be used to plan a much larger assault." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "We have to warn them. We have to get a message to Earth somehow." "That will not be necessary," Ember said, rising to his full impressive height. "The Eternal Flight has deliberated and we have reached a consensus. The Drakmor have remained neutral in the conflicts of younger species for many millennia. But this attack ship crew made a critical error." "What error?" Ember's eyes met his with surprising gentleness, despite the power radiating from his massive form. "They left a friend of ours stranded to die alone in the darkness. This we will not tolerate." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Ember began to sing. It was not like the harmonic speech Marcus had grown used to, but something far deeper and more complex. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the station's superstructure and making the very atoms of the air vibrate in harmony. The song of making, but infinitely more powerful than anything Marcus had witnessed before. The lights dimmed as Ember's scales blazed with blue radiance so intense that Marcus had to shield his eyes. Through the restored viewport, he could see something impossible happening in the space around Meridian Station. They were not alone. Dragons were emerging from what appeared to be empty space, as if reality itself was folding to accommodate their arrival. Dozens of them, each as massive as Ember, their scales gleaming like dark stars as they materialized around the station. The Eternal Flight had come. The Krathan warships, which had been approaching in a standard search formation, suddenly found themselves surrounded by creatures they had thought were myths. Marcus watched through the station's sensors as the enemy ships tried to bring their weapons to bear, but the dragons moved with impossible grace for creatures of their size. "We do not typically involve ourselves in the wars of warm bloods," Ember explained as his kin began to engage the warships. "But your species has shown us something we had forgotten. The value of friendship forged in adversity. The strength that comes from hope maintained despite impossible odds." On the display screen, Marcus watched one of the Krathan ships attempt to flee, only to find its path blocked by a dragon whose scales pulsed with the same blue light he had seen Ember use to repair the station. But instead of healing, the Song of Making was being used to encourage the ship's weapons to remember a time before they had been assembled. In seconds, the warship's entire armament array simply ceased to exist, leaving the vessel helpless. "This is incredible," Marcus breathed. "This is friendship," Ember corrected. "The Eternal Flight has seen many species come and go, but few have ever shown us the kind of partnership you offered freely. You asked for nothing but my company. You shared your knowledge and your stories without expecting anything in return. You treated me as an equal, despite the vast differences in our capabilities." The battle, if it could even be called that, was over in minutes. The Krathan ships found themselves completely disabled, their crews unharmed, but their vessels utterly powerless. Marcus watched in amazement as several dragons began to sing in harmony, their combined voices creating a resonance that opened what appeared to be a rift in space itself. "A gateway to Krathen's space," Ember explained. "They will return to their empire with a message from the Eternal Flight. Any further aggression toward your species will be met with our direct intervention." As the disabled ships were gently pushed through the spatial rift, Marcus felt a strange mix of gratitude and sadness. The immediate threat was over, but he realized this meant his time with Ember was coming to an end. The dragon had fulfilled his part of their bargain and then some. "You saved my entire species," Marcus said quietly. "You saved mine," Ember replied. "For too long, the Eternal Flight has observed without participating, watched without caring. You reminded us that isolation, even chosen isolation, is a form of death. We had forgotten the joy of partnership, the strength that comes from standing with others against the darkness." The communication panel suddenly came alive with incoming signals. Multiple ships were dropping out of hyperspace, but these were human vessels, drawn by the massive energy discharges from the battle. Rescue had finally arrived. Marcus should have been overjoyed, but instead he felt a deep sadness at the thought of leaving his unlikely friend. Over the past week, Ember had become more than just his savior. The dragon had become his partner, his teacher, and his friend in the truest sense of the word. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked. "The Eternal Flight will no longer remain hidden," Ember said. "We will seek out other species, other partnerships. We will remember the lesson you taught us about the value of friendship and the strength that comes from working together despite our differences." As the first human rescue ship docked with the station, Marcus realized that what had started as a desperate struggle for survival had become something much more significant. Humanity had gained its first truly powerful ally among the stars, and the Drakmor had rediscovered their connection to the wider galaxy. The impossible had become possible, just as Ember had promised, and it had all started with a simple conversation between a stranded mechanic and a dragon who had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. 6 months after the rescue from Meridian Station, Marcus Chen found himself in the most unlikely position of his life, sitting across from the Secretary General of the United Earth Alliance, explaining why humanity needed to completely rethink its approach to interstellar relations. "Let me understand this correctly, Mr. Chen," Secretary General Rodriguez said, tapping her stylus against the polished conference table. "You're telling me that these dragons, these Drakmor, want to establish formal diplomatic relations based on a friendship you formed while stranded on a destroyed space station." "It's more complex than that," Marcus replied, fighting the urge to fidget with his formal uniform. 6 months of debriefings, interviews, and diplomatic meetings had not made him any more comfortable in political settings. "The Drakmor have been watching our species develop for centuries. What happened on Meridian Station convinced them that we're worth partnering with on a galactic scale." "And what exactly did happen?" The question came from Admiral Hayes, the Alliance's military representative. "Your initial reports were somewhat lacking in detail about how you convinced a mythical species to intervene on our behalf." Marcus had been expecting this question. His official reports had necessarily been vague about the exact nature of his relationship with Ember, partly because he was still processing it himself, and partly because he knew how incredible it would sound to people who had not experienced it firsthand. "I didn't convince them of anything," Marcus said carefully. "I just treated Ember like a person instead of a legend. We worked together, shared stories, became friends. The Drakmor had forgotten what that felt like, and they decided it was worth protecting." "Friendship," Admiral Hayes repeated skeptically. "You're saying the most powerful species in the galaxy intervened in a military conflict because of friendship?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "That's exactly what I'm saying." The door to the conference room chimed, and Marcus felt a familiar surge of excitement. He had been hoping this moment would come, though he had not been sure the diplomatic corps would agree to it. "Ah," Secretary General Rodriguez said, rising from her seat as the door opened. "Our other guest has arrived." Ember flowed into the room with the fluid grace that never failed to amaze Marcus. The dragon's massive form somehow managing to navigate the doorway without damaging anything. Over the past months, Marcus had learned that the Drakmor possessed a sophisticated understanding of space and matter that allowed them to adjust their physical presence as needed. "Greetings, leaders of the Warm Ones," Ember said, his harmonic voice filling the conference room with subtle resonances. "I am honored to speak with those who guide Marcus Chen's people." Secretary General Rodriguez, to her credit, managed to maintain her diplomatic composure despite facing a creature that filled half the room and could probably level the building with a thought. "The honor is ours, Ember of the Drakmor. We welcome this opportunity for formal dialogue between our species." Admiral Hayes was less successful at hiding his awe. Marcus could see the military officer's mind working, calculating the implications of what he was witnessing. A single dragon had disabled an entire Krathan battle group without causing a single casualty. What could an entire fleet of them accomplish? "You have questions about our intentions," Ember observed, settling into a position that brought his massive head down to the level of the conference table. "This is wise. Trust must be earned, not demanded." "We're grateful for your intervention against the Krathan," Secretary General Rodriguez said diplomatically, "but we're also curious about what you hope to gain from a formal alliance with humanity." Ember's golden eyes shifted to Marcus for a moment before returning to the Secretary General. "Marcus Chen has taught us something we had forgotten during our long existence, the joy of discovery that comes from encountering new perspectives. Your species thinks in ways that are foreign to us, and that difference is valuable." "How so?" Admiral Hayes asked. "You build things expecting them to break," Ember replied. "We create things intending them to last forever. You plan for failure. We assume success. You adapt constantly. We prefer stability. Together, we might achieve something neither species could accomplish alone." Over the following hours, Marcus watched in fascination as humanity's leaders and his ancient friend discussed the practical details of interspecies cooperation. The Drakmor offered knowledge and technology that would advance human civilization by centuries. In return, they wanted access to human creativity, adaptability, and what Ember called the gift of perpetual dissatisfaction. "You are never content with how things are," Ember explained when Admiral Hayes asked for clarification. "You always believe they could be better. This drives you to constant innovation, constant improvement. The Eternal Flight has grown complacent in our perfection. We need the reminder that perfection is not an end state, but a direction of travel." The negotiations stretched over several days, but eventually, the framework of a formal alliance began to take shape. The Drakmor would establish a permanent embassy on Luna, close enough to Earth to facilitate regular contact, but far enough away to avoid causing panic among the general population. In return, humanity would send a small delegation to the Eternal Flight's ancient gathering place in the galactic core. "Who would you recommend to lead this delegation?" Secretary General Rodriguez asked as they finalized the details. Marcus was surprised to find both the human leaders and Ember looking directly at him. "Me?" he said incredulously. "I'm a mechanic, not a diplomat." "You are the bridge between our species," Ember replied gently. "The first to show that meaningful partnership is possible despite our vast differences. Who better to guide others in learning what you have already discovered?" And so Marcus found himself appointed as humanity's first ambassador to the Eternal Flight, a position that had not existed a week earlier and for which no training manual existed. His first official act was to request that his sister be assigned as the delegation's medical officer and his parents as the cultural attachés. "You're bringing your entire family?" Secretary General Rodriguez asked, when she reviewed his personnel requests. Ember was curious about human family structures, Marcus explained. I figured the best way to explain them was to show him. Besides, my dad's pretty good with electronics, and my mom has a doctorate in anthropology. They'll be useful. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the UEA vessel, Friendship, watching as they approached the Drakmore gathering place. The ancient space station was a marvel of bioengineering, grown rather than built, its organic curves stretching across several kilometers of space. Thousands of dragons moved through its structures, their scales creating patterns of light that Marcus was beginning to understand as a form of complex communication. "It's beautiful," Lin Chen said from beside him. Marcus's sister had adapted to life among the Drakmore with typical doctor's pragmatism, spending her time learning about their biology and sharing human medical techniques with their healers. "It's functional," their father added from his position at the engineering console. "Everything here serves multiple purposes." It's like they think of the entire station as a single organism. Their mother was busy taking notes on her tablet, documenting everything for her planned anthropological study of Drakmore culture. "The integration of individual and collective identity is fascinating," she murmured. "Each dragon maintains complete autonomy while participating in a shared consciousness. It's the opposite of a hive mind." As they docked with the station, Marcus felt a familiar sense of anticipation. Over the past year, he had come to understand that his friendship with Ember had been just the beginning. Humanity and the Drakmore were learning from each other in ways that neither species had anticipated. Human engineers worked alongside dragons to develop new construction techniques that combined the song of making with conventional technology. Human artists collaborated with Drakmore poets to create forms of expression that transcended the limitations of either species' traditional methods. Human doctors shared their knowledge of rapid trauma response while learning about the dragon's methods of healing that encouraged the body to remember its healthiest state. But perhaps most importantly, both species were learning to appreciate the value of different perspectives. The Drakmore's patience and long-term thinking helped humans consider the consequences of their actions across longer timescales. Human curiosity and willingness to experiment inspired the dragons to explore new applications for abilities they had taken for granted for millennia. "Ambassador Chen," came the familiar harmonic voice as they disembarked. Ember was waiting for them in the station's main reception area, his scales glowing with what Marcus had learned to recognize as pleasure at seeing old friends. "Just Marcus, remember?" he replied with a grin. "We're friends first, diplomats second." "Indeed," Ember agreed. "Come, there is much to show you. The Eternal Flight has been busy implementing some of your suggestions." As they toured the station, Marcus was amazed to see the changes that had occurred since his last visit. Human-designed redundancy systems had been integrated into critical areas, providing backup functions that the Drakmore had never considered necessary. In return, dragon-enhanced materials were being tested for use in human construction projects, offering strength and durability that conventional engineering could not match. The most remarkable development, Ember explained as they visited a workshop where humans and dragons worked side by side, has been the emergence of hybrid solutions, technologies that neither species could have developed alone. Marcus watched as a human technician worked with a dragon partner to create what appeared to be a self-repairing circuit board. The human provided the logical design and modular construction, while the dragon used the song of making to encourage the components to maintain their optimal configuration over time. "It's like organic technology," Marcus observed, "the best of both approaches." "The Eternal Flight has decided to share this development with other species as well," Ember said. "We believe the galaxy would benefit from more collaborative approaches to solving common challenges." Over the following weeks, Marcus learned that the alliance between humans and Drakmor was having ripple effects throughout the galaxy. Other species were reaching out to establish contact with the Eternal Flight, curious about the partnership that had convinced the ancient dragons to abandon their isolation. Some were seeking similar collaborative relationships of their own. The Krathan Empire, interestingly, had been among the first to request a formal ceasefire and opening of diplomatic channels. The demonstration of Drakmor power had apparently convinced them that aggressive expansion was less appealing than cooperative development. "Change spreads," Ember observed one evening as they sat in the station's observation deck, watching the stars wheel slowly past. "Your species has reminded the galaxy that growth comes from connection, not conquest." "We're not the only ones who learned something," Marcus replied. "Working with you has changed how we think about everything. We're starting to plan for centuries instead of decades, to consider the long-term impacts of our choices. And we have learned to embrace uncertainty as opportunity rather than threat," Ember said. "The Eternal Flight is more alive now than we have been for millennia." As Marcus looked out at the stars, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he had been just another mechanic, fixing broken equipment and keeping the lights on. A random attack had stranded him on a dying station, where he had expected to face death alone in the darkness. Instead, he had found friendship in the most unlikely place and helped forge an alliance that was changing the galaxy. It struck him that this was very human, really. Taking a disaster and turning it into an opportunity, finding hope in hopeless situations and building something better from the ruins of what came before. "What's next?" he asked. Ember's scales flickered with amused light. "For a species that values uncertainty, you certainly ask that question often." "Because we know the answer keeps changing," Marcus replied with a laugh. "That's what makes it interesting." "Indeed," Ember agreed. "What is next is whatever we choose to build together. The possibilities are infinite." Looking out at the stars, Marcus could almost see those possibilities spread out before them like a roadmap to the future. Humans and dragons, working together to solve impossible problems and turn the darkness between stars into something filled with light and hope and friendship. His grandfather had been right. If you were going to die, you might as well die useful. But as it turned out, if you were going to live, you might as well live connected. And in the vast universe, that connection made all the difference between surviving and truly being alive. The mechanic had kept the lights on after all. Not just for one dying station, but for an entire galaxy that was learning to shine brighter together than any of its parts could manage alone.